I am Jen SAMSON, invasive lobular carcinoma cancer survivor. I am a mother of two teenage girls, and I am the CEO and principal at Jen SAMSON Design and Interior Design Studio. So I was 46. It was 2019 when I found out about the breast cancer. And at that time, my daughters were 12 and 9 years old. Life was at full steam ahead. I was building my interior design business and running around like all moms do with two young girls in elementary school and in middle school, while at the same time working towards growing my own company. When I found out about the diagnosis, I had also planned a very big family trip that I was just about to take in just a few weeks. And so there was a lot of hurt nerves around carrying on with my regular life while I was at the same time trying to figure out what my plan was going to be. I remember that being just a very complex time where I had a lot of conversations with so many people, different doctors, people to give me different advice. And although I loved my surgeon, I knew that he was the guy. He wasn't really willing to make those decisions for me. It wasn't that clear. And so as I processed it all, as I went through it all, as I looked at my life and thought about, well, I'm 46, I'm so young, like my children are so young. I made the decision to just do what I felt was going to give me the best possible outcome without really as minimal risk as possible. So for me, it became pretty clear relatively quickly through this process that I was going to have a double mastectomy. I'm a designer, so I care about symmetry. I didn't like the idea of one breast being different than the other. I felt as though, even though the chances of it ever showing up in my other breast were virtually nothing, there was always a chance of that. And so I just thought, at this point, at this stage, what I want to do is do a double mastectomy. So that was my first big decision. So my second big decision was deciding whether or not I was going to keep my nipples. And strangely enough, I don't know that many women would necessarily feel the same way as me, but I really liked my nipples. And so there was this like weird period of time where I would talk with my husband about it and trying to figure that out. And again, it came down to why risk anything? So I made that very hard decision as well to get rid of my nipples at the same time. So that was probably like one of the hardest chapters of all of this for me, was just making those choices and then committing to those choices and looking at those choices as, okay, so what will be next? What does the next few phases look like? And what that ended up looking like for me, surprisingly, well, obviously not surprisingly, in that it was a year-long process of surgery and then subsequent reconstruction. And so I started down that process. I had the double mastectomy. I think one of the next hardest days for me was after that. I was standing in front of the mirror. They did put in some sort of like placeholders for the implants. So I was so nervous to like unzip that tight thing that they put on you after the surgery. And surprisingly, I remember standing in the mirror crying, unzipping it. And they actually looked okay. In that moment, I was like, oh, okay, it's weird. I don't have nipples, which I had a plan for, and I will share that with you in a second. But other than that, like, they were pretty much the same size. They, other than all of the drainage and all of the crazy stuff that you have to go through, I had these small placeholders that eventually became my small implants that mimicked my breasts at the time. And then over the course of the next, I think it was like 8 months, I had my reconstructive surgery. And then once that healed, I had an amazing plastic surgeon. She was wonderful. And I went in for another procedure to where she actually tried to build and create like a little nipple, a bump, I would say, underneath my skin. And then the last step of that process, which was really kind of the most unbelievable, was I had my nipples tattooed. People always say to me, like, do you have any tattoos? And I don't, other than the 2 on my breast. So yes, I have 2, which, I'm very proud of. And I mean, the story behind that is kind of personal, but also worth sharing, because I did say that I liked my nipples. The night before my surgery, I had this whole moment with my husband. This is going to be very silly, and maybe you don't want to include this in the story, but I had him like take pictures of my nipples, because I was like, if I'm going to get tattoos, I want them to be as close as possible to what I had before. I don't want some like strange nipple tattoo, the whole thing. So I went through the process, and my surgeon recommended this woman specifically in California, and we drove to her, and I think I visited her twice. And I have to say, truthfully, that now, like, when I look at myself in the mirror, other than the fact that I'm a 46-year-old woman with, the breasts of like a 16-year-old, because they're very perky and small, but they look as close as you could imagine to what they were before. So even though I had to make those incredibly difficult decisions, which I am so grateful that I did, to be honest. And, everyone has a different path, but for me, that's the kind of person I am. I'm kind of like all in all the way. If I'm going to commit to something, the idea of, having margins checked over and over was so scary for me, that making the commitment to having the double mastectomy and doing the reconstructive surgery, and even going as far as having nipple tattoos, gave me so much strength in the months and years that have followed. So that was my process. From there, because of the type of cancer that I had, chemotherapy was ruled out almost immediately. I did not need chemotherapy, which I was so grateful for. Again, having 2 young girls, I mean, telling them about this was definitely the hardest day of my life to date. And I can't even imagine how challenging it would be as a mother to go through chemotherapy and lose your hair and have to, all of that as well. I didn't have to do any of that. And radiation was a question that, through meeting with doctors after the fact, also kind of became a you could or you couldn't, you can or you don't have to situation for me. And in the end, as I met with numerous radiologists, and the latter one, I didn't have to do radiation. One thing I forgot to mention, though, is during the surgery, when I was having the double mastectomy, they did find that I had also some of very, very, I can't remember the terminology for the size of the cells, but they were like, you almost couldn't see them. So they were in my lymph nodes. So that was very concerning. And during the surgery, they ended up taking out 11 of my lymph nodes on the left side, and felt very confident that they got it all. I think that my surgeon was very aggressive in his approach, knowing that that's what I wanted him to be and do. And so I was like, I don't care about, I'm going to get through it. I want to live. I want to live a long life. So do what you need to do. And so he really went into it with that mentality and ended up taking out 11 lymph nodes as well at the same time. So after all of that, I didn't need chemotherapy. What a gift. I didn't need radiation. Another huge gift. So I returned as quickly as possible to every part of my life, to showing up for my kids, being at their school events, sitting on the beach in a bathing suit with, even before I had my implants in and I just had my placement implants in, I went to the beach and wore a bathing suit. I jumped right back into work. I remember I had a huge project that I was right in the middle of that I was working on in Palm Springs. I never even told the clients. I just had my team pick up where I left off, took 2 weeks off, dealt with what I needed to, and then gently, but also, intentionally returned back to my life in every way that I knew how. And I remember people saying to me, you're unbelievable. You've just jumped right back in. It doesn't even look like you've had surgery. How are you doing all this? Meanwhile, I'm walking around with a large shirt and drainage bags underneath my shirt and going through this whole process. But to me, there was no other way. There was no other path forward. That's how I've always kind of lived my life. And so because I didn't have to go through anything that prolonged me looking in the mirror and seeing a big change other than what I knew I was going to have to do, I was able to just carry on and get back to living the life that I wanted to be living. So that was my mentality. I would say that I just continued to live it fiercely and fully. That's what I was doing before. That's what I did throughout. And that's how I continue to live my life. Everyone has such a different way of handling even the same diagnosis, the exact same thing, And so I don't know that there's a right way or a wrong way. I just know that moving forward is inevitable. And so, whatever makes anyone comfortable in order to get through this and get to the other side of it and be able to reflect on it like we are now. I mean, this is a gift. To be able to talk about this with you feels really good because I do feel like it is behind me, even though it is a part of me in so many ways on an everyday basis. And, it's changed me in so many ways, but it's also reminded me that, I am who I am and life will continue to move forward. And this will not change the essence of who I am as a human being, as a person, as a mom, as a friend, any of it. So I didn't join any support groups. And although not everyone around me were my closest people, because I had young children, I felt like I needed to tell a lot of people because I was unsure of what I was going to need and how that was going to look for my kids and my husband. And so I remember I wrote an email and I put together a big long list of moms in my community that were some of my closest people and some of my children's mothers as well. because I wanted everyone to know so that they could be there for my family, not just me, but be there for my family. And so even though my community is somewhat small, sending out that email and letting people know, it was like an outpouring of like love and support. And so my already small community became an even tighter and close support group for me on the day-to-day. And then outside of that, obviously my family, my husband and my children, my old friends who, had known me through college and through my adolescence. After I sent that email, I wasn't afraid to tell people because I felt like I just put it out there. And so the community that lifted me up, carried me through, was definitely my family and myself, to be perfectly honest. I'm not always like the most outspoken with things that are personal to me in my life. I would say I am a little bit more of a private person when it comes to personal things. But in this case, because I knew that it was going to so directly affect my family, I had no other choice. And so, although I feel like I am a big, proponent of like, I helped myself get through it, my husband was an enormous supporter and helpful to me in every level, and my young children, and then the community that surrounded me, my peers and my family primarily were my support group. It's changed me in a few ways, positive and negative. I would say, I guess it's all positive because I'm not a hypochondriac. However, I'm incredibly in tune with my own body. And I pay great attention to everything that's going on with my body all the time. So in some respects, I've become a little bit more paranoid because I'm always, a little bit more hyper concerned. For example, I also chose to have an elective oophorectomy about a year and a half or 2 years after I had breast cancer. My aunt actually had ovarian cancer. And although I did all the genetic testing and there was no marker, no uptick in any of that for me or for anyone in my family, I did feel like, they didn't see my breast cancer in a mammogram either. I don't know if I mentioned that, but they did a mammogram after I felt it, and they didn't see it. And so then I had a ultrasound, and they did see it. And then they were like, well, there's clearly something there. We're going to do a biopsy. And so because that happened as well in my process, and a mammogram wasn't how this was discovered, I found it, and then it took. So because of that, and then after the surgery, knowing that I had gone all the way and done all these things, I had a nephrectomy. I decided, you know what, I'm just gonna have my ovaries out. I'm done having children. That's another thing I can just check off the list. I'm not gonna have to worry about getting ovarian cancer because there's that connection. And that sort of mentality has kind of carried with me in the way that I approach my health in general. So that's one of the things that has sort of shifted with me, where before I was much more laissez-faire about going to see the doctor or staying on top of, what I need to be doing, or checking in on my own health, or, always all of that. I'm hyper vigilant with all of those things now. And I'm fine with that. I'm happy with that. On the other, another thing, I think that it changed my perspective. I mean, I've always kind of lived life to the fullest. I've never been a fearful person. I I've always just kind of jumped into things wholeheartedly, but I would say coming through breast cancer um, reignited that spirit for me even more so, to where like fear is not an option. And that trickles down in my life, in my career, in the way that I, parent my children, in the, risks that I take, or, places I want to visit, or things that I do in general, people I want to speak to. I feel like when fear starts playing a role in my life, I truly believe that going through what I did kind of propels me forward in a way that I can sequester the fear and like give myself the encouragement, the confidence, the ability to push further, take risks, and just live the life that I want to live, right? Life is for the living and we're alive. So I'm like, let's do it all. Let's enjoy it. Let's embrace everything that we can. And um and so that is a gift for sure. There's a lot of gifts. I always find the silver lining in everything. And through this, I've been able to find a lot of silver linings. The only thing that I would say negatively that it has affected me, that it's affected in a negative way for me, is it has kind of amped up my fear of death. I'm not very comfortable with the idea of dying, probably because in that moment you sit in your bed and you're crying and you're like, oh my God, like, is this it? Like, I've barely even just begun. And now there's this possibility that this could be. And so in the back of my mind, that's always kind of been there. And so the idea of death and leaving this life at any time, even if I've lived to 100 years old, is not something that I'm fully comfortable with yet, or that I'm, at peace with. So it's something that I'm working towards it. I'll get there eventually, and hopefully I'll be 100 when that actually does happen. But yeah, overall, I would just say that I don't let fear stand in my way. And I think that having breast cancer has really given me the ability to live my life that way and just be as present as possible. I live such a busy life by choice. I always have a million balls in the air. My career is part of my identity as much as being a mother is my identity. And I love my children. I love my husband. I love my family, and I love being a mother. And I also love being an interior designer, and I love the creative process, and I love what I do. And so I don't want to stop doing either of those things. One piece of advice. It's hard to pick just one thing. One piece of advice. Know that you can get through this. Believe it. Tell yourself that you can and you will, and do everything in your power to visualize yourself after breast cancer. See your life, what it's going to look like after you've gotten through it. I think that's very powerful. And for me, looking ahead, always looking ahead, and imagining what it would feel like and what it would look like when it was behind me, is probably the best advice that I can give to anyone, is just know that there is life beyond this, and getting through it and visualizing yourself and seeing what your life will be once you've gotten through it is incredibly powerful. And got me here. So fight like hell means fight like hell. Fight like hell means give it all you got. Push through. Look at the positives. See the other side. Don't be afraid of, don't get stuck in the moment. Like, muster up that energy inside, that inner strength that we all have, that's inside of all of us, that you've probably, tapped into at so many other points in your life, through your childhood and through jobs and through life. Fight like hell means just channeling your inner tiger and going after what you want, pushing through and seeing what's on the other side. You got this. Fight like hell.